Right now, you may be lying perfectly still while your mind is running down 3 different roads at the very same time. You are caught in the heavy stillness that comes when a choice must be made, yet every single direction feels like a door closing on a version of yourself you are not ready to lose. It is an exhausting way to live, carrying the weight of multiple unlived futures while staring at the dark ceiling. You might feel a tightness in your chest, a subtle heat behind your eyes, or a restless hum in your limbs that makes your bed feel less like a sanctuary and more like a crossroads. Maybe you have spent days, weeks, or even months mentally walking through every single outcome, trying to predict where the rocks are hidden and where the smooth ground lies. You are trying so hard to protect yourself from regret that the act of protection has become the very thing that is breaking your spirit. Let the room around you grow soft now. Let the crisp edge of the sheet beneath you hold your weight, and feel the cool night air as it gently moves against your skin. Outside your window, the world has paused its demands, leaving only the quiet shadows of the evening and the steady, patient rhythm of your own breathing. You do not need to turn on the light to find a way out of your dilemma tonight. In this space, the heavy curtains block out the pressure of the clock, and the pillow beneath your head offers a place where your thoughts can finally stop marching. Let your jaw unlatch just a fraction, and feel the small muscles around your eyes release their long guard. There is a deep, fragrant silence waiting for you when you are ready to slide down into it. You are not failing because you do not have the answer yet. The paralysis you feel is not a flaw in your wisdom, but a reflection of how deeply you care about living your life beautifully. Tonight, we are not going to force your mind to pick a side, and we are not going to weigh the arguments one more time. We are going to step completely away from the scale. What if the exhaustion you carry does not come from the choices themselves, but from your attempt to live tomorrow before it has even arrived? Buddhist wisdom offers a strange and beautiful truth for a mind that is caught in the trap of indecision. The mind does not find clarity by perfectly mapping every single destination. It finds a profound rest when it realizes that an unchosen path holds absolutely no suffering. We often believe that if we think a little longer, or analyze a little harder, we can find a path that contains no pain and no loss. We treat the future as if it is a magnificent tapestry already completed and hidden behind a velvet curtain, and we assume our only job is to guess the pattern correctly. But Zen reminds us that the cloth of your life is not waiting for you in a finished room. It is being woven thread by thread, pass by pass, in the exact place where your feet are resting right now. Think of your mind during these restless hours as an immense wooden loom that has been wound too tight. Every choice you are trying to make is a single strand of raw silk, pulled until it hums with dangerous tension. When you try to hold 20 different futures in your mind at once, the warp and the weft become so crowded that the shuttle cannot move, and the entire structure begins to creak under the strain. You are exhausting yourself by trying to wear a garment that has not even been placed on the frame. You do not have to resolve the pattern of your entire life before the sun rises. It is completely safe to leave the threads loose for the night. Perhaps you have felt this deep fatigue in your bones, the sense that you are drowning in options while starving for certainty. When we look at our lives through the lens of fear, every decision feels like a cliff edge. We ask ourselves, what if I choose wrong? What if I hurt someone I love? Or what if I look back and realize I walked away from my only chance at happiness? These questions are natural, but they are also heavy stones that we drop into our own laps while trying to rest. In a moment, we will travel up a winding mountain path to a quiet workshop where the air smells of crushed mulberry leaves and damp wool there. We will meet an old weaver who understands exactly what it means to stand before an empty frame with trembling hands. His story will show us something much quieter than a simple answer to a difficult problem. It will show us how to drop the tension of the strings entirely, so that the wood can rest and the hands can become still. For now, just let yourself be right here in the dark. Every single argument your mind is making can wait until the morning. The paths you are terrified of missing will not disappear if you close your eyes. They will remain exactly where they are, floating like unspun fiber in a wicker basket, waiting for the proper time. You do not need to be the architect of your destiny tonight. You only need to be the breath that moves in, and the breath that moves out, letting the room hold you exactly as you are. Long ago, in a high valley where the morning mist lingered in the branches of the cedar trees, a young clerk named Ren climbed the stone stairs toward the northern ridge. His heart felt heavy, like a vessel filled with wet sand. For many months, Ren had been torn between two paths that seemed to stretch in opposite directions. He could remain in his ancestral village to care for the lands his father had left behind, or he could journey to the bustling capital, where a position at the grand court awaited him. Every evening he sat by his small oil lamp and drew lines in the dust, weighing the security of the valley against the promise of the city. He could not sleep, because every time he imagined choosing one life, his mind wept for the version of himself he would have to abandon. His thoughts had become a labyrinth, and the more he walked through it, the more exhausted his limbs became. At the crest of the ridge stood a long, low workshop built from weathered cedar beams. This was the home of Master Jihan, an old weaver who spent his days working in absolute solitude. The valley people said that Jihan possessed a strange clarity, though he rarely spoke more than a few words to those who sought him out. When Ren reached the threshold, the heavy wooden door stood open to the morning air. The room inside was filled with the rich, earthy scent of raw, unwashed wool and the sharp sweetness of crushed mulberry leaves. Sunlight streamed through the high rafters, illuminating millions of tiny dust motes that danced in the silence like miniature stars. In the center of the vast floor sat an enormous timber loom. The great oak pillars of the frame were dark with age, smoothed by decades of pressure and touch. Master Jihan was seated on a low bench before it, his feet resting motionless on the heavy wooden treadles. His long gray hair was tied back with a simple strip of hemp, and his hands rested quietly upon the frame. He did not turn his head when Ren entered, but the steady rhythm of his breathing did not change. Ren stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the vast silence of the mountain, before he stepped forward and bowed low. "Master Jihan," the young clerk said, his voice trembling slightly in the quiet air. "I have come because my mind is torn in two. I stand before a choice that will alter the shape of my entire existence. Yet I am paralyzed by the terror of making the wrong turn. I feel as though I am standing on a narrow rope between two peaks, and if I step forward I will fall into a valley of lifelong regret. Please tell me which path holds the true design for my life." The old weaver remained perfectly still for several moments, his eyes fixed on the empty space within the loom. Then, with a slow and deliberate movement, he reached down into a shallow wicker basket at his side. He lifted a beautiful, smooth object made of polished cherry wood. It was an unweighted shuttle, the hollow tool used to carry the horizontal thread across the long vertical strings of the loom. Ren leaned closer, expecting to see a brilliant strand of dyed silk wound tightly around its core. But as Jihan held the shuttle in the morning light, Ren realized it was completely bare. There was no thread inside it. The wooden center was entirely empty. Without saying a word, Master Jihan reached out and gripped the heavy overhead bar of the loom. He pressed his foot down on a treadle, and the long vertical threads shifted with a soft, dry rasp. Then, with a fluid sweep of his right arm, he sent the empty wooden shuttle sliding across the frame. It glided through the open space between the tight vertical strings, making a hollow clicking sound as it landed in his left hand. Clack thud. The old man swung the overhead bar forward, locking nothing into place. Ren watched in confusion as the weaver shifted his feet, gripped the bar once more, and sent the bare shuttle sliding back in the other direction. Clack thud. The empty wood flew across the vast frame, passing through the web of strings without leaving a single trace behind. The loom moved with an immense rhythmic power, yet the space beneath the warp remained completely blank. The wood groaned under the pressure of the movement, but no cloth was being created. "Master Jihan," Ren whispered, stepping closer to the massive timber structure. "Why do you work the loom if you carry no thread in your hand? The machine is moving, the wood is straining, but you are weaving nothing but the wind." The old weaver stopped his hands. He held the unweighted shuttle lightly between his palms, letting the polished cherry wood catch the golden sunlight. He turned his face toward Ren, his eyes calm and deep like mountain pools. "Look at the vertical strands on this frame," Jihan said. his voice soft like the rustle of dry grass. "These are the threads of the warp. They are held under immense tension. They are pulled so tightly by the iron pegs at the top and the heavy stone weights at the bottom that they hum if the wind blows through the door. For 3 days, young clerk, you have been standing in my doorway, looking at these tight strings. You believe that your suffering comes from the choice you have not made. But look closer." Ren looked at the long rows of white silk threads, stretched to their absolute limit across the dark oak wood. He could see that the structural beams of the loom were bending slightly under the sheer force of the tension. The entire frame seemed to be crying out under a silent, invisible weight. "You are like this loom," Jihan said gently, placing the empty shuttle on the wooden bench. "You have pulled the threads of your mind so tight that the wood is beginning to warp. You are trying to hold the security of your village on one side and the glory of the capital on the other side. You have stretched both futures across your chest at the very same time, pulling them tighter and tighter with every hour you spend overthinking. The exhaustion you feel is not the weight of the capital, nor is it the weight of the valley. It is the weight of the tension you are creating by trying to hold two worlds on the same frame before you have even begun to weave." Ren felt a sharp throb behind his temples as the old man's words struck his heart. He looked down at his own tightly clenched fists, realizing that he had been gripping his imaginary future so hard that his palms were bruised. "But if I do not hold them tightly," Ren asked, "how will I know which pattern is the correct one? How do I choose the thread that will not break?" Master Jihen reached out and lightly tapped the bare wooden shuttle. "The thread does not break because it is chosen perfectly," he replied. "The thread holds because it is allowed to meet the other side. But you are not weaving. You are simply straining the machine. You believe that by thinking, you are creating the fabric of your life. But look at the frame. It is still empty. All your worry has not created a single inch of cloth. It has only made the wood cry out in the dark." The old man stood up from the bench, his movements slow and graceful, and walked toward the open door to look out at the valley mist. Ren remained standing before the massive loom, staring at the empty wooden shuttle resting on the dark oak beam. For the first time in many months, he noticed that the air in his own lungs felt slightly deeper. The tight band around his chest did not vanish entirely, but the illusion that his thinking was doing useful work began to crack. But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself to the young clerk. He did not yet understand what it meant to let the shuttle fly without fear, or how a mind could remain steady when the pattern of the future was completely invisible. He stood in the quiet studio, surrounded by the smell of raw silk, realizing that he had arrived at the edge of a different kind of truth. This encounter in the mountain workshop is not asking you to become an indifferent observer of your own existence. Zen wisdom never demands that you turn your heart into cold stone or that you stop caring about the direction of your life. It is not an invitation to abandon your responsibilities or to float aimlessly like a severed leaf in a creek. Instead, the old weaver is pointing toward a much quieter sanctuary that exists beneath the noise of your conflicting thoughts. He is showing us that the core of our exhaustion does not live within the actual choice that stands before us. The heavy ache in your chest grows from the way your mind keeps gripping the invisible threads of tomorrow, pulling them into the present moment until the wood of your inner peace begins to split under the strain. The Buddha pointed toward a profound truth about human nature when he described the origins of our deepest distress. He reminded us that in this life we will always meet moments of natural friction. There will always be transitions that feel uncertain, relationships that shift, and forks in the road that require us to step into the unknown. This initial friction is simply the raw texture of being alive. It is the unspun wool before it meets the wheel. But the mind, in its terror of being hurt, rarely leaves the wool alone. We place it upon our loom and pull it with a desperate, crushing force. We tell ourselves that we must weave a flawless armor out of our thoughts to protect ourselves from every possible regret. This desperate gripping is what Buddhist insights describe as attachment, translated into the language of your Latinite worry. It is the tight, suffocating voice that insists reality must conform to our exact predictions before we can allow ourselves to breathe. When you lie awake at night, running through every scenario. You are attempting to force a fluid world into a rigid shape. You are demanding that the future reveal its secret design before it has even been dyed or spun. This demand does not provide safety. It only increases the immense tension within your body, turning a simple human transition into a state of chronic inner warfare. Consider what happens when you try to live multiple lives simultaneously. You spend an hour mentally living in the capital, experiencing all its imagined failures and successes. Then you rush back to the village, feeling the phantom grief of what you might leave behind. Your mind is running back and forth across a vast, empty distance, throwing an unweighted shuttle through the air, yet leaving your hands completely empty. This constant, frantic movement is what turns ordinary uncertainty into absolute suffering. The suffering is the second wound we inflict upon ourselves. The first wound is merely the reality of an undecided path. The second wound is the judgment, the panic, and the endless self-blame we layer on top of the silence. Mindfulness, when stripped of its modern complexity, is simply the ability to sit quietly before the loom without pulling the strings until they snap. It is the gentle courage to observe a thread of fear or a strand of hope without instantly tying your identity to it. You can notice a thought about the future without allowing that thought to drag you down a long, dark corridor of anxiety. When a wave of worry rises in your awareness, you do not have to fight it, and you do not have to obey it either. You can simply allow it to exist as a single strand of raw silk floating loosely in the room, carrying no power to destroy you. Impermanence is another beautiful medicine that the weaver's workshop offers to your tired mind. Nothing in this world remains permanently fixed, and no decision you make will lock your life into a static, unchangeable box forever. The paths we choose are fluid, constantly reshaping themselves with every step we take. When you realize that the fabric of reality is always shifting, the terrifying weight of making a perfect choice begins to dissolve. You are not choosing a permanent prison. You are simply making the first pass of the shuttle. If the next thread needs to be a different color, the loom will still be there, waiting for your hand. True awareness is the wide, quiet space that contains all your doubts without becoming doubtful itself. It is the spaciousness of the workshop floor, which comfortably holds the massive oak frame, the heavy stones, and the loose baskets of wool without feeling crowded by any of them. You are that space. You are not the tangled threads, nor are you the creaking wood. You are the silent presence that notices the tension. And because you are the space, you have the power to loosen the pegs whenever you choose. Compassion begins when you stop treating your indecision as a crime. You have been so hard on yourself for not knowing the answer, as if clarity is something you can beat out of your own heart through sheer willpower. But the heart does not open its petals when it is beaten. It opens when the wind drops and the air becomes warm. By extending a soft, non-judgmental kindness to your own anxious thoughts, you create the very ground where clarity can finally grow. You allow the extra struggle to fall away, leaving only the simple, honest truth of where you are right now. Slowly, this ancient wisdom begins to come closer to your own life. It leaves the high mountain ridge and enters the quiet room where you are listening. It steps into the tight spaces behind your eyes, the heavy rhythm of your heart, and the restless patterns of your breath. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter, moving us from the understanding of the mind down into the actual releasing of the weight within the body. But before we move into that deeper practice, let yourself absorb the comfort of this one realization. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to not know the way forward. The loom does not require a perfect pattern to be worthy of its place in the sanctuary. Let us bring the stillness of that mountain workshop into the space you occupy right now. There is no need to stand up, or change how you are positioned, or try to achieve a special state of holy quiet. You might begin by simply noticing the actual weight of your body pressing down against the mattress, allowing the solid ground beneath the house to take over the work of holding you up. For many hours, your muscles have been acting like the wooden pillars of the loom, stiffening to hold the weight of all those unmade choices. You can let that structural effort go for a while. If it feels right, allow your breath to come in a little more slowly, not because you are trying to control it, but because you are letting it find its own natural depth, like water sinking into cool earth. As you draw the next breath, perhaps you can sense the subtle movement in your ribs, a gentle expanding that requires no calculation or planning on your part. Your body knows how to live without you, needing to tell it how to survive. On the exhale, let a wave of softness travel down from the top of your head, through the tiny muscles around your eyebrows, and down into the corners of your mouth. Let your throat widen slightly, creating an open gateway for the air to pass through without any friction. There is absolutely nothing you need to accomplish in this moment. Even noticing the tightness in your body is enough. You do not need to fix the tightness. You only need to give it permission to be seen. Right now, in the quiet theater of your awareness, you might perceive a single thought that has been circling your mind all evening. Do not push it away, and do not try to delete it from your memory. Perhaps this thought is a heavy thread about what will happen if you choose one path. Or maybe it is a dark strand of fear about what you might lose if you walk away from the other. Whatever it is, look at it as if it were a single thread of raw, unspun silk floating in the room. It is just a strand. It has no power to bind you, and it has no weight until you pull it tight. Give that thought a soft name in your mind, perhaps labeling it simply as predicting, or fearing, or planning. By giving it a name, you step off the weaver's bench and become the one who observes the frame. Now, if it feels right, imagine that you are holding that smooth, unweighted shuttle of polished cherry wood that Master Jihin left on the oak bench. The wood is cool and heavy in your palm, smoothed by years of quiet movement. Take that tight thread of worry, the one that has been keeping your heart awake, and imagine wrapping it gently around the center of the wooden shuttle. You are not trying to destroy the worry, and you are not trying to solve the riddle it presents. You are simply giving it a place to rest outside of your chest. Watch the thread wind loosely around the dark wood, settling into the hollow groove until it is entirely contained within the tool. Let the image shift slightly now. See yourself placing that wooden shuttle down into a wide wicker basket that sits on the floor of the workshop. The basket is deep, woven from split willow branches that smell of the riverbank and the summer rain. Inside this basket, there are no tight strings, and there are no heavy weights pulling the fiber until it snaps. There is only a soft, weightless pile of unspun silk, resting in the deep shadows beneath the oak frame. When you place the shuttle into the basket, the tension on the thread vanishes completely. It becomes loose, relaxed, and perfectly inert. It does not demand an answer from you tonight, because it is no longer stretched across your heart. Let your awareness return to the physical sensation of the air entering your nostrils. Feel the coolness of the inhale and the absolute warmth of the exhale. You are right here, safe within the dark parameters of your room, and the loom of your mind has been cleared of its burdens for the night. You do not have to decide who you will be tomorrow, or which road you will walk when the morning comes. The paths themselves are just images, floating like dust motes in the sunlit rafters of an empty studio. Let yourself drop into the space beneath the thoughts, the vast, silent floor that remains steady no matter how many threads are spun or cut. There is no pressure to heal your life in the next 10 minutes. True transformation is not a sudden snap of the wood, but a gradual softening of the fibers as they adjust to the moisture of the evening. If your mind tries to wander back to the wicker basket to pull out a thread, do not become angry with yourself. The mind has been trained for years to weave armor out of fear, and it takes time for the hands to learn how to rest empty on the bench. Simply notice that the shuttle has been lifted again, and with a soft breath, invite yourself to lay it back down among the willow branches. Even an inch of slack in the rope is a victory for a heart that has been bound tightly for so long, and this is where the mind begins to experience a different kind of safety. You are realizing that you can live within the question without being destroyed by the lack of an answer. The uncertainty is no longer a blade held against your throat. It is simply the open space where the pattern has not yet been formed. In a moment, our journey will take us back to that high ridge many years later, where the young clerk returns with a different kind of wound, seeking a deeper truth about what happens when the fabric of our choices begins to tear. What happened next changed the way he understood suffering entirely, moving him into a valley where even the broken edges were full of light. For now, just let yourself drift in the quiet rhythm of the breath, knowing you are safe enough to soften. Many years passed by, and the young clerk Ren was no longer a youth with smooth hands. He had eventually chosen to leave his ancestral valley for the capital, and for a long time the momentum of his busy life had kept the old questions at bay. But life in the great city did not remain predictable. A sudden shift in the court politics, combined with a season of heavy flooding that ruined the trade routes, brought an end to his stable position. Once again, Ren found himself standing in the ruins of his carefully constructed plans. The old habits of his mind returned with a fierce, burning urgency. He lay awake in his small rented room in the city suburbs, his mind frantically building 3 different scenarios to rescue his future, pulling at the threads of his life until his jaw clicked with tension, and his chest felt bruised by the weight of his thoughts. Unable to find rest, Ren packed a small cloth bag and walked back toward the northern ridge. He sought the quiet sanctuary of the Weaving Valley, hoping to find Master Jihan sitting before the giant timber loom. But when he reached the summit, he found the old weaver's workshop silent and empty, its hearth cold. A passing woodcutter informed him that Jian had passed away 3 winters ago. The woodcutter directed Ren further down the opposite slope of the mountain, where an aging nun named Sister Soren managed the ancient stone storehouse where the regional monastics kept their winter textiles. Ren descended the rocky path as the afternoon light began to turn a deep, smoky amber. The storehouse was a low building constructed from heavy granite blocks, partially dug into the side of the mountain. When Ren pushed open the thick oak door, the air that met him was cool, thick, and redolent with the scent of dried lavender, old cedar boxes, and the faint sweet oil used to preserve iron hinges. Lantern light flickered against the damp stone walls. Sister Soren was standing near a massive wooden table, lifting a heavy bundle of fabric. She was a woman of advanced years, with deep lines etched around her mouth, but her eyes held a bright, almost unsettling focus. Sister Soren, Ren said, bowing until his fingers touched his knees. I am a man who has lost his way a second time years ago. Master Jihan taught me to loosen the threads of my mind. I followed his advice. I made a choice and I built a life. But now that life has been torn apart by circumstances I could not control. I am paralyzed by the fear that my next choice will ruin whatever fragment of my future remains. I feel as though the fabric of my destiny has been shredded, and I am left holding nothing but rags. Sister Soren did not offer words of sympathy, nor did she tell him that everything would be restored. Instead, she let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed off the granite walls, a sound filled with genuine amusement rather than cruelty. She reached into a deep cedar chest behind her and pulled out a large, heavy object, placing it flat upon the wooden table between them. Look at this, she said, gesturing toward the cloth. Ren stepped closer to the table. In the dim light of the lantern, he saw a magnificent piece of tapestry stretching several feet across. The weave was incredibly dense, depicting the lower half of a mountain river, with waves carved from blue and silver silk threads. The craftsmanship was breathtaking, but as Ren's eyes moved upward along the fabric, he caught his breath. The design did not terminate in a finished border or a woven hem. Right in the middle of the patterns, the entire tapestry had been violently severed from the frame. A long, uneven row of loose warp threads hung down like raw fringes, dangling uselessly over the edge of the wood. The upper half of the mountain, the sky, and the clouds were completely missing. Who did this? Ren asked, his fingers hovering over the frayed edges. What a terrible tragedy. Someone has ruined a masterpiece before it could ever be finished. It is completely broken. Sister Soren looked at the frayed threads, her face soft in the lantern flame. No one ruined it, she replied quietly. I cut it from the loom myself. Ren stared at her, his mind looping in confusion. Why would you cut a beautiful cloth from the frame before the pattern was complete? You have left it unfinished. It can never be worn. It can never be hung in the temple, and it can never fulfill its purpose. It is a ruined piece of work. Sister Soren reached out and picked up a heavy iron pair of shears. The cold metal clinking against the table, she ran her thumb along the blunt side of the blade. The monk who was weaving this cloth became obsessed with the final image, she said. He spent his nights staring at the empty upper half of the loom, weeping. Because he was afraid he did not possess enough silver thread to finish the clouds perfectly. He refused to weave the river because he was terrified the sky would not match the water. The tension on the frame became so immense that the oak beams began to crack. He was dying of fear before the cloth was even half born, so I walked into his room, took these shears and cut the warp. Ren felt a strange chill pass through his shoulders. He looked at the long, dangling fringes of the unfinished tapestry. "But how can it be useful if it is not whole?" he asked. "It is whole exactly where it ends," Soren said, her voice dropping into a deeper, resonant tone. "The mistake you are making, Ren, is the same mistake you made as a young man. You believe that a life is only valuable if it matches the completed drawing in your head. When your court position disappeared, you felt that your tapestry was ruined. But look at this cloth. Touch the silver threads of the river. Are they less beautiful because the clouds do not exist above them? Does the river fail to flow because the sky is missing?" Ren pressed his palm against the dense silk waves. The texture was incredibly solid, cool, and remarkably strong. The fabric did not unravel, because the weaver had bound the final rows with a simple, tight knot before the cut was made. The mind that overthinks is always trying to weave the sky before it has finished the water, Soren continued, placing her hand gently over Ren's clenched fist. "You are paralyzing yourself tonight because you are trying to guarantee the ending of a story that hasn't even written its next sentence. You want a choice that leaves no loose ends. But life is nothing but loose ends. Every breath you take is an unfinished pattern." Ren stood perfectly still in the granite storehouse. The smell of cedar and lavender seemed to coat the back of his throat. He looked down at the uneven fringe of the tapestry, and for the first time in his life, he did not see a failure. He saw a profound release. The realization hit him not as a sudden flash of light, but as a slow, deep settling of his gravity. He recognized that his suffering did not come from the loss of his position in the capital. It came from his refusal to inhabit a life that had a jagged edge. What happened next was a very small movement, but it changed the direction of Ren's spirit. Completely, he did not ask Sister Soren for a solution to his employment. He did not ask her to predict whether he should return to the city or stay on the mountain. Instead, he took a deep, slow breath, letting his chest expand fully in the cool air of the storehouse. He reached out his hands, took the heavy, unfinished tapestry, and folded it neatly into a square, smoothing down the frayed fringes with his palms. He did not try to hide the cut strings. He simply allowed them to be part of the bundle. "I will help you move the winter blankets, Soren," Ren said softly. The old nun looked at him, a warm, silent smile breaking across her wrinkled face. She handed him a heavy stack of wool, and together they worked into the evening, their footsteps rhythmic against the stone floor. Ren's external problems were not solved. He still had no wealth, no title, and no certainty about where he would sleep in the coming months. But as he carried the heavy textiles through the dim light, the desperate hum in his ears began to fade. He was no longer treating his uncertain future as an enemy to be conquered. He was simply holding the thread that was currently in his hands. And this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart tonight. In a moment, we will look deeper into the exact mechanism that causes your mind to choose tension over rest. We will examine the secret reason why we prefer the pain of overthinking to the simple freedom of an unfinished day. But before we explore that deeper terrain, let yourself remain for a few moments with the image of that cut tapestry, resting peacefully on the table, complete in its incompletion. When we look deeply into the mechanics of our own exhaustion, we find a hidden habit that operates beneath our conscious thoughts. The mind that cannot stop looping between different options is usually a mind that has confused control with safety. You might notice that when a difficult choice appears on the horizon, your thoughts immediately begin to treat uncertainty as an enemy invasion. You begin to rehearse the future as if it were a script you could memorize, or you replay your past missteps as if you could rewrite the old ink by staring at it long enough. This relentless mental activity is actually a form of resistance against the present reality. We tell ourselves that if we analyze the situation just a little bit longer, we can avoid the natural vulnerability of being human. This inner friction is exactly what creates the weight you feel as you lie awake tonight. We spend an enormous amount of energy trying to fix our uncertainty through self-criticism. We tell ourselves that we should have figured it out by now, or that our hesitation is a sign of personal weakness. This self-judgment acts like a heavy, rusted weight tied to the delicate framework of our peace. We become so attached to the idea of a perfect, smooth path that we turn our temporary confusion into a permanent identity. You begin to think of yourself not as a person navigating a transitional moment, but as a fractured individual who is fundamentally incapable of making a correct movement. The Buddhist insights invite us to make a crucial distinction between the natural occurrences of life and the secondary suffering we construct within our own minds. Consider the raw material of a changing world. A career path ends, a relationship shifts its shape, or a sudden storm alters the landscape of your outer stability. These occurrences are like the natural variations in the raw fiber that comes from the field. Some strands are coarse, some are fine, and some are stained by the weather. This initial variation is simply the truth of what is. It contains a natural sharpness, a sudden chill, or a momentary disorientation. This is the primary event, a necessary element of walking through time. The real difficulty begins when we refuse to accept the texture of the raw fiber. The mind touches a coarse strand and immediately goes into a panic. We place that single variation upon our inner loom and pull it with a frantic, desperate energy. We wrap it around our chest, tightening the pegs until we can barely draw a full breath. We drop heavy stones of worry onto our own laps, weeping because the cloth is not perfectly uniform from one end to the other. This extra labor, this intense friction of trying to force the thread to be something other than what it is, constitutes the entirety of our suffering. We cannot always dictate the quality of the fiber that life places in our hands, but we are fully capable of pausing before we wind the machine so tight that it shatters. Peace does not arrive because you have finally found a way to eliminate every single problem from your existence. True ease of heart is not a state where the weather never changes and the loom never creaks. It is a completely transformed relationship with the uneven edges of your reality. When you stop demanding that the tapestry of your life show a flawless, uninterrupted design, you can finally enjoy the beauty of the rows you have already completed. You can look at the raw fringes, the unfinished sections, and the sudden changes in color without feeling that your entire journey has been a failure. The value of the cloth does not depend on its length or its symmetrical perfection. It depends on your willingness to sit before it with an open, unclouded heart. We often cling to our worries because we are terrified of what will remain if we lay the shuttle down. Overthinking can feel like a strange kind of companion. It gives us the illusion that we are doing something active to protect our lives. Even when we are simply spinning our wheels in the dark, we fear that if we stop analyzing our choices, we will become entirely vulnerable to the wind. But Zen reminds us that the space beneath the thoughts is not a void of danger. It is the wide, solid sanctuary where your true nature rests, completely untouched by the passing clouds of confusion. You do not need to preserve your anxiety to keep yourself safe. You can let the tension drop, allowing the wood of your structure to cool in the quiet air of the evening. Now, let this understanding sink down from your intellect into the deeper layers of your physical body. Notice how your breathing responds when you realize that you do not have to fix your entire life before the sun rises. The dilemma that felt like a mountain an hour ago is still there, but it has lost its sharp, jagged teeth. It is just an unfinished tapestry resting on the table, waiting for the proper season. You can look at its dangling threads with a soft, forgiving gaze, acknowledging that human beings are permitted to walk through periods of fog without being accused of losing their way. Slowly, this quiet realization begins to prepare the ground for your everyday life. The wisdom of the mountain workshop is not meant to remain locked inside an ancient story or a Latinite meditation. It is designed to step directly into the small, noisy moments of your tomorrow, changing the way your hand moves when the pressure returns. In a moment, we will explore exactly how this ancient perspective applies to the modern world you inhabit, showing you how to practice the art of the single thread amid the rush of a complex day. But for now, just allow yourself to remain right here in the quiet space you have created, resting your mind within the steady, unforced movement of your breath. Slowly, This ancient perspective begins to walk down the mountain ridge, leaving the smell of cedar boxes behind to enter the landscape of your modern daylight. The wisdom of the loom is not an antique philosophy meant to remain framed on a wall. It is a soft armor for your ordinary hours, designed to meet you in the exact moments when your life feels fragmented. Think of how this internal tightness manifests on a typical Tuesday afternoon. You find yourself staring down at a cold glass screen, waiting for a single notification or a message that will validate your standing in someone else's eyes. In those seconds of quiet panic, the old habit rises instantly. Your mind begins to string up a massive web of assumptions, pulling each thread until your shoulders grow tense and your jaw locks with stress. Have you noticed how easily we turn a simple daily delay into a structural crisis? When a response does not arrive, or when a professional project faces an unexpected delay, the mind does not see a loose thread. It sees a total structural collapse. You begin to weave a long, elaborate narrative about your own insufficiency, imagining that you are falling permanently behind your peers. We spend our mornings looking at the brightly colored tapestries that others display to the world, comparing their finished silk surfaces against the messy, unfinished underside of our own daily struggles. You look at your own loose ends, your doubts, and your financial uncertainties, and you judge your cloth as fundamentally broken. Perhaps you have spent your afternoons smiling politely while carrying a leaden weight behind your ribs, pretending to be perfectly settled while your internal shuttle flies frantically in circles. You try to manage the emotional climate of your entire household, or you attempt to predict every twist in a changing relationship, mistakenly believing that a harder grip will prevent a painful change. We check our phones 50 times a day for a sudden reassurance, hoping that an external word will somehow loosen the iron pegs that are crushing our peace. And when the evening arrives and your body desperately needs to put down its tools, a modern kind of guilt steps into the room. You feel that you have not earned the right to drop the weight, because the pattern of your life remains unresolved. But let the memory of the cut tapestry come back to you in those moments of exhaustion. True practice does not ask you to change your entire life path in a single day, nor does it require you to fix every broken dynamic before you are permitted to close your eyes. Peace is found in the very small spaces between your reactions. It is the simple decision to breathe fully for 3 seconds before you pick up the phone to type a defensive reply. In that tiny pause, you are choosing not to pull the thread tight. You are allowing the shuttle to rest empty on the frame for just a brief moment, letting the immediate situation remain open and unfinished without turning it into a tragedy. You can care deeply about your work, your family, and your financial security without turning that care into a tightening noose. To love a path does not mean you must freeze it into a permanent shape. When you find your thoughts replaying an old mistake from 3 years ago, trying desperately to find the exact moment the design went wrong, you can notice the movement without joining the labor. You can say to yourself, "This is just the old thread humming in the wind." You do not have to obey the hum, and you do not have to pull it back into the cloth. Even noticing that your mind is trying to optimize the future is a massive victory for your heart. Rest is not a luxury you must purchase with a day of flawless productivity. The loom does not need to be full of completed cloth to deserve a quiet night in the studio. In the eyes of Zen wisdom, your right to experience an untroubled sleep is completely independent of your outer achievements. You are allowed to leave the loose edges exactly as they are when the light fades. By giving yourself explicit permission to hold an unperfected life, you dissolve the very mechanism that keeps your pulse racing at midnight. The future will arrive row by row, and it will be met with the same hands that are currently learning how to let go. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life as the room grows darker. The external world will continue to offer you coarse fibers, sudden disruptions, and moments of absolute silence. But you are becoming someone who knows how to sit before the frame without breaking the wood. You are discovering that a life with raw fringes can still be a magnificent repository of light. In a moment, we will enter the final descent into absolute quietness, where the language slows down even further, and the image of the loom dissolves entirely into the deep, dark safety of the evening. Before we enter that final rest, let your heart receive this one gentle truth. You have done enough for this day. The threads are safe in the basket, and the night is ready to hold you. The room has grown completely still now, and the twilight that once hovered over the mountain ridge has deepened into a vast protective darkness. Outside your window, the world has ceased its weaving for the day. The paths that seemed so loud and demanding a few hours ago have dissolved into the quiet shadows of the evening. There are no choices left to weigh, and there are no arguments left to hear. The air in your room is cool and steady, moving in and out of your lungs with a slow, effortless grace that requires absolutely no guidance from your conscious mind. Let the muscles in your back spread out against the surface beneath you, feeling the deep solidity of the ground that holds you without asking for anything in return. Your body is becoming heavy now, sinking down into the quiet sanctuary of the mattress. Feel the lingering tension in your shoulders begin to unspool, like silk threads slipping away from a tight wooden peg. You can let your feet drop outward, completely relaxed, no longer poised to take a step down an uncertain road. Let your hands lie open beside you, their palms soft and slightly warm, resting entirely empty. For a very long time, you have been working the treadles of your mind, trying to outrun your own vulnerability. Tonight, the grand timber loom is standing completely quiet in the studio. The tension weights have been taken off the frame, and the wood is simply resting in the dark, absorbing the coolness of the mountain night. Let the image of the unfinished tapestry settle gently into the deep places of your heart. You do not need to sew a perfect border on your life before you are allowed to rest. The jagged edges, the raw fringes, and the unexpected changes in your design are not flaws in your wisdom. They are the honest markings of a path that is being lived in real time. The rows you have already woven are real, and they are beautiful exactly as they are. Even if the upper half of the mountain remains unwritten in the fog, you are permitted to be a half-finished story tonight. You are permitted to drop into the silence without knowing where the next thread will lead. Listen to the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. Each exhale is a slow releasing of the day, a soft loosening of the warp that has held your spirit under such immense strain. The thoughts that kept you awake are nothing but unspun fiber resting quietly in a wicker basket under the moonlight. They carry no weight, they possess no edge, and they cannot disturb the profound stillness of the room unless you pull them tight. Let them stay in the willow branches. Let them remain fluid and unstructured, waiting for the sunlight to find them when the proper season arrives. You have dropped the scale. You have stepped away from the bench, and your hands are completely clean. The space inside your mind is growing wider now, like the dark floor of the storehouse when the lanterns are put out. You are not the anxiety that hums, and you are not the dilemma that loops. You are the deep, unbothered awareness that contains the night, the spacious presence that remains perfectly safe even when the pattern is hidden. There is no need to protect yourself from tomorrow. The ground will rise to meet your foot when the moment comes, and the thread will find its way through the open space without you needing to force its flight. For now, the darkness is absolute, and the sanctuary is complete. Let yourself slide all the way down into the heavy, comforting blanket of the evening. The air is soft, the mind is loose, and the wood has ceased its groaning. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to mend, and nothing left to prove to a rushing world. You are safe enough to soften completely. You are safe enough to let the eyes close, letting the physical form dissolve into the weightless silence of a deep, untroubled rest. What if the tomorrow you have been exhausting yourself to calculate is already arriving perfectly, not by the strength of your grip, but through the gentle loosening of your hands?